When you look up at the night sky, you see stars. But you don't really see the stars as they are, right? You see, like, constellations. You see a hunter, or a bear, or a crab. We connect these dots of light because, well, a chaotic sky is terrifying. But a picture book is safe.
Right, yeah.
Right.
We draw these imaginary lines to just impose order on the darkness. We trap the universe in our stories so we don't feel quite so small.
Exactly. But what happens when the stars decide they don't want to be a bear anymore? What happens when the things we've trapped in our stories just, decide to speak for themselves?
Well, then the stories break. And the real darkness, like the truth we've been hiding from, it just comes flooding right in.
And that tension, that tug of war between the safe stories we tell and the dark truths we hide, that is the beating heart of today's deep dive. Welcome in, by the way. Today we are looking at a truly brilliant piece of source material. It was actually just published today, May 9, 2026.
Yeah, it's fresh off the press.
Right. It's a blog post by the writer Farid Novin on his site, Plays and Philosophy. And he's posted the complete script for this 3-act philosophical play called The Camp of Mirrors.
Which is just an incredible read. I mean, it reads like a modern ghost story, but it really functions as the surgical dissection of human history.
Oh, totally. The setting itself is so evocative.
Yeah.
So picture this. You are at a summer camp in the remote northern wilderness. It's the dead of night. And there's this chorus of teenage girls sitting around a campfire at the edge of a black glacial lake.
And slowly, walking out of the woods to join them at the fire, are 5 women that history has essentially labeled as monsters.
Yeah. We're talking about Medusa, Medea, Pandora, Jezebel, and Aholibah.
Right. 5 centuries of condemnation just gathered around a single fire.
It's such a striking image. And the stated mission of this script, which is our mission for this deep dive too, is to examine this very specific argument. The play suggests that human civilizations use stories and myths and history books not to explain the women they fear, but to contain them, to build fences around them. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, before we even get to the women themselves, we have to look at what's hiding in the shadows just behind the campfire, because the setting is actively making this profound argument about how those fences get built in the first place.
Oh, right, the men in the shadow.
Yes. Lurking upstage, barely visible, are what the script calls the 3 silent men, and they represent the core institutions of human civilization. You have the man with the black book, which is representing scripture or editorial power.
Right.
Then you have the man with the sword and shield, representing force. And finally, you have the commander, representing authority itself.
And they never say a word.
Not a single word. The stage directions actually note that their silence is the loudest language in the play.
Which makes sense, right? Because they are the architects of the constellations we were just talking about. They decide what the stories are, who gets to be a hero, and who gets turned into a monster. And the first monster to step into the light of the fire is Medusa. And right away, the play takes everything you think you know about her myth and just shatters it.
It really does. It forces us to look at how trauma and betrayal get rebranded by history as monstrosity.
Yeah, because when she arrives, she doesn't roar. She's not acting like a beast.
No, she's actually very calm. She just explains her origins. She tells the girls she was a priestess in Athena's temple, and she was violated inside the sanctuary by a god. And Athena, the goddess of wisdom, found it politically easier to punish Medusa than to punish the powerful god who actually committed the act.
It's so messed up.
It is. And the lesson the play extracts from this is chilling. It says systems of power will always find the one who cannot fight back and make her the story.
Wow. And Medusa brings up the philosopher Martin Heidegger here, which, I mean, that's a heavy pivot for a campfire story. But it just works so well in this context.
It does. So Heidegger wrote extensively about humanity's tendency to, quote, forget being.
Forget being. Okay.
Right. To put that in plain terms, he meant we have this terrible habit of no longer encountering each other as living, breathing, complex presences. Instead, we just reduce each other into objects, like into categories or utilities or warnings.
Right, yeah. Like how we treat people we don't understand in our own daily lives. We flatten them into a two-dimensional concept just to avoid dealing with their messy humanity.
Exactly. And Medusa argues that her specific curse wasn't being killed by Perseus. Her curse was being reduced. She was stripped of her being and turned into a thing that warns other things away.
It's like, I was thinking about this, it's like turning a tragic car crash victim into a cold, inanimate caution sign on the side of the highway.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. and then blaming the victim for being scary to look at.
Yeah.
You strip away their humanity to make them functionally useful for society's rulebook.
Yeah.
But I do want to push back slightly on this idea of her being, like, totally victimized by this process.
Okay, how so?
Well, was she entirely powerless? Because in the script, she has this really haunting line. She tells the teenage girls, silence is what happens after the roar has stopped working. She seems to have this terrifying, almost grounded agency in her quietness.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Medusa is far from powerless in this narrative. She explains to the girls that fear has simply worn itself out around her. She has outlasted the terror.
Outlasted it.
Yeah. She recognizes that the heroes who came to hunt her, with their mirrored shields, they didn't come to actually see her. They came armored against an encounter they had already decided was unsurvivable.
Right.
So by turning her into a monstrous symbol, civilization thought it was protecting itself, but it was really just hiding from its own brutality. Her silence is like the ultimate refusal to play the role of the screaming monster they need her to be.
Which is such a brilliant contrast to the second arrival. Because Medusa shows us the tragedy of being forced into silence. But what happens when the target of the story refuses to be quiet?
Right, what if they fight back?
Exactly. What happens when they loudly, destructively break the rules of the system that betrayed them? That requires a totally different kind of punishment. Which brings us to Medea. And Medea is famous in myth for killing her own children to punish her husband Jason for betraying her.
Yeah. And Medea steps up to the fire, wrapped in this dark traveling cloak, basically embodying the ultimate exile. And she explains that exile isn't just geographic, it's not just being kicked out of a city, it's an architectural collapse.
An architectural collapse.
Yes, the total destruction of the structure of the self. She gave up her language, her rituals, her entire family to build a life around a man who later just casually replaced her for political gain.
And she invokes Søren Kierkegaard's concept of the sickness unto death. And I feel like we really need to pause here and explain what that actually feels like, because it sounds incredibly bleak.
It is bleak, yeah. Kierkegaard wasn't talking about physical death. He was describing a profound spiritual despair. It's the unbearable fracture between who you once were and who you have been forced to become.
Oh, man.
Just imagine waking up one day and realizing that every single building block of your identity, your relationships, your home, your purpose has been ripped away.
Like the house just caved in on you.
Exactly. You are still breathing, but the you that existed is gone. Medea lost the actual materials that built her identity. And to explain how society judges that despair, she brings in Immanuel Kant's philosophy.
Right.
Kant believed morality must be universal. He argued that the same moral rules must apply everywhere, at all times, to everyone.
But Medea points out this massive, gaping loophole in Kant's theory. The loophole is that universality always speaks in the accent of the victorious, which is the ultimate asymmetry of history. Think about it. When an empire slaughters the children of its enemies to secure its borders or its power, history books call it strategy. But when a wounded woman destroys the life she built because someone else burned it to the ground first, history calls it madness.
And this asymmetry is really the crux of Medea's entire testimony. Why do civilizations fear wounded women so deeply? It's because wounded women actually remember.
They remember the truth.
Right. Empires are sustained by collective forgetting. They rely on the public not asking who made the original promises and who broke them. So a woman who remembers the broken contract, who refuses to let the betrayal go quietly, she is a living, breathing metric of the empire's failure.
Wow. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because we move from women whose trauma was rebranded by history to women who were actively, intentionally set up by the architecture of power. We're talking about rigged systems now. And that brings Pandora to the fire.
Yeah. Pandora arrives carrying a heavy bronze box. And she immediately points out the absolute absurdity of the myth we all grew up hearing.
Right, the classic Pandora's box story.
Exactly. According to the story, she was fashioned by the gods, intentionally equipped with a fiery curiosity, placed in a room right next to a forbidden box, and then blamed for the fall of humanity when she opened it. The gods literally built the trap, gave her the desire to trigger it, and then put her on trial for it.
It's completely rigged. I was reading this and thinking, it's like an escape room designer locking a player inside a room, giving them a flashlight and all the clues, and then taking them to criminal court for trying to open the door. Like, you built me to do this.
That is the perfect analogy. And Pandora turns to the philosopher Michel Foucault to explain why the gods are, the institutions of power, why they did this. Foucault argued that power doesn't just work through a king pointing a sword at you. It works much more efficiently through categories. It defines the parameters of what is normal and what is deviant, and Pandora notes the glaring double standard in these categories. When men seek forbidden knowledge, think of Prometheus stealing fire, or Galileo looking through his telescope. Society eventually calls them visionary
Oh,
heroes.
yeah.
But when women seek forbidden knowledge, society calls it the original sin.
Man, I really want you, the listener, to think about this in your own life. Think about the corporate structures or social circles you navigate every day. Who gets labeled an innovator for breaking protocol, and who gets labeled a troublemaker or a liability for doing the exact same thing?
Yeah, the rules are rarely about the action itself.
Exactly. They're about who is performing the action. But the part of Pandora's argument that honestly stopped me in my tracks was her provocation about hope. The myth always says hope was the last thing left in the box, right? Like a gift left behind to comfort humanity after all the evils escaped.
Right, but Pandora suggests something much darker, and frankly, much more logical from the perspective of an oppressive system. She suggests hope is actually the most sophisticated instrument of management ever invented.
A management tool.
Yes, let's dig into the psychology of that. A person in absolute, total despair revolts. If you have absolutely nothing left to lose, you burn the system down. Despair creates revolution. But a person sustained by a tiny sliver of hope, that person waits.
Because they don't want to risk losing the 1% chance that things might improve.
Precisely. They adjust, they accommodate the cruelty of the system. Hope in the hands of authority is not salvation. It is a leash. It is how you keep a suffering population infinitely patient.
That is so heavy, it completely flips the concept of hope on its head. And speaking of refusing to wear a leash, we get to Jezebel, the foreign queen of Israel. This is arguably the most weaponized name in human history. To this day, calling someone a Jezebel is an immediate character assassination.
It is, and Jezebel walks into the firelight with total composure. Her crime, as she explains it, wasn't just being a foreigner or worshiping different gods. Her ultimate unforgivable crime was calmness. She refused to apologize for existing with confidence.
And she brings up Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of master morality and slave morality to explain how the system weaponized her name. And we need to translate Nietzsche into plain English here because the mechanism is fascinating. How does the definition of virtue change depending on who holds the power?
Well, Nietzsche argued that different classes of people invent different moral systems just to justify their existence. Master morality values pride, strength, and nobility.
Right.
Slave morality values obedience, humility, and submission. And Jezebel points out the ultimate trick played by institutions of power. In a system that requires strict obedience to function, the system eventually convinces the subjects that their obedience is synonymous with holiness. Being a good, unquestioning cog in the machine is rebranded as being virtuous. Therefore, any nonconformity isn't just different, it is spiritual corruption. Jezebel had her own framework. She refused to abandon it, and so the system she declined to join wrote the history books to condemn her forever.
And as she delivers this argument, she looks directly out into the darkness at the three silent men.
Right.
The Black Book names the legitimate behavior, the sword enforces it, and the commander decides what's necessary to maintain order. It is literally the skeleton of every system of power we live under today.
Which leads us to the most abstract and perhaps the most terrifying figure in the play, Aholibah.
Right, because unlike Medusa or Medea or Jezebel, Aholibah wasn't a real historical person who was eventually turned into a myth.
No, Aholibah is a prophetic metaphor from the biblical book of Ezekiel. She was a rhetorical device, an imaginary woman used to represent the city of Jerusalem, which the prophet was accusing of spiritual adultery. The language used against her in the text is graphically, unspeakably violent. She was condemned, judged, and rhetorically executed before she ever even had the chance to be human.
And she delivers a devastating warning to the teenage girls about this exact process. What's fascinating here is
how she frames it.
Right.
Yeah.
She says the absolute most dangerous thing that can happen to a human being is to become a metaphor while you are still alive.
Yes.
Because once you are a symbol, you are no longer owed the basic empathy or consideration we give to actual people. You are just a position in an argument.
And she references Heidegger again here, specifically his deep anxiety about language. Words don't just passively describe a reality that already exists. Words actively construct the reality we agree to live in.
Constructing reality.
Right. Think about historical atrocities. If a government repeatedly calls a specific group of people impure or vermin or a disease, eventually the suffering of those people doesn't register to the public as suffering. It registers as a necessary public health measure.
It registers as justice.
Exactly. Aholibah's warning is that metaphorical violence is simply the paved road to actual violence.
She argues that societies don't just stumble upon enemies, they manufacture them efficiently.
Yeah.
Because without an enemy on the outside, the wall has no meaning and the soldier has no purpose.
Yeah.
But I have to throw a question at you, kind of pushing back on Aholibah's point.
Okay, go for it.
Is it actually possible for any human society, anywhere, to exist without an outside or an enemy? Like, isn't it just a hardwired biological flaw in human nature? We seem to only know who we are by defining ourselves against what we are not.
It's a crucial question. Are we biologically destined to draw lines in the sand and push people across them? The play seems to argue that whether it's innate human nature or not, it is absolutely the required nature of institutions. Institutions, represented by those three silent men, require deviants to survive. They need a perimeter. If there is no threat, there is no need for authority. But the play also suggests something profoundly optimistic here. While the architecture of power is ancient, human consciousness can evolve. Which brings us to the climax of the play.
So what does this all mean? We have these 5 women carrying the weight of 5 massive philosophical arguments, sitting around a campfire with a chorus of teenage girls. And the girls ask them for tools, not just history lessons, but practical tools they can carry into the future to dismantle this machinery.
Yeah, and the women deliver specific, actionable advice. Medusa says, train yourself to notice the exact moment someone stops being a person to you and becomes a category.
Wow. And Medea says whenever a story is being told, ask who benefits from it, because the beneficiary is rarely a character in the story.
Right. Pandora says, trust your interior life and do not mistake your natural curiosity for transgression just because someone put a lock on a door.
Jezebel says when someone uses a name as a synonym for corruption, ask who wrote that definition.
And Aholibah says, learn to measure the distance between a living person and the story told about them.
Because that distance is where the violence lives. Armed with these tools, the dynamic of the entire camp begins to shift. We enter scene the 4th of the script, which is titled The Disarmament. And the most shocking part is that it is entirely voluntary.
It is the most hopeful moment in the text. The commander slowly emerges from the shadows, takes off his official insignia, and places it on the ground. The man with the sword lowers his shield and leans his weapon against a tree. The man with the black book tears out one of his blank pages, representing his editorial power over history, and throws it into the campfire.
They do not speak a word, but they are physically diminished.
Yes.
And the girls are confused. They ask what it means. Jezebel tells them it means that even symbols can choose differently. The architecture of power is old, but it is not permanent. It can be redesigned.
If we connect this disarmament to the bigger picture, the play is telling us that authority only holds its shape as long as we collectively agree to be terrified by the stories it tells us.
The fear is the glue.
Exactly. The 3 silent men only have power when the chorus of girls is afraid of the monsters. The moment the girls look at Medusa and see a person instead of a threat, the men in the shadows lose their jurisdiction. The walls become obsolete.
Which brings us to the final, beautiful image of the script. The morning. The camp director arrives on the scene, and she's just a middle-aged woman wearing a fleece jacket, holding 2 cups of coffee. She walks into the clearing and sees the girls, the historical monsters, the disarmed men, and she isn't afraid. The script notes that she is something much more useful than afraid. She is paying attention.
The women rise from the fire. And the text makes it clear they aren't magically redeemed or transformed back into innocent maidens. They just stand there as complex, flawed, breathing people.
Yeah.
And as the sun rises over the black glacial lake, the light hits everyone equally. The water, the fire, the girls, the historical women, the disarmed men. The illumination plays no favorites. No one stands above another.
It's a breathtaking conclusion to an incredibly dense and layered piece of work. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to talk directly to you, the listener. Think about the narratives you consume every single day. You are constantly bombarded with stories from news feeds, history shows, social media algorithms, and even office gossip. You are constantly being handed pre-packaged constellations, narratives neatly telling you who is the hero, who is the monster, who is pure, and who is deviant.
The challenge that the Camp of Mirrors lays at your feet is to be the camp director, to stand at the edge of the clearing of your own life and simply pay attention, to look closely enough at the people around you to separate the living, breathing human being from the convenient symbol or cautionary tale society has tried to turn them into.
And I want to leave you with the final thought to mull over, building on Aholibah's terrifying insight about walls and enemies. If human civilizations actively manufacture monsters and enemies just to justify the existence of their boundaries and their soldiers, what happens to those boundaries the moment you decide to stop being afraid of the dark? Do the walls finally fall down? Or do you just realize, as you look up at the chaotic, unstoried stars, that you never actually needed the walls in the first place?